The House has passed a bill that could prevent up to 21 million eligible American citizens from voting. Supporters call it election security, critics call it voter suppression, and the truth about what's actually in this bill is way more complicated than either side wants you to think. So we're talking about the Save America Act, an updated and expanded version of the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. It's passed the House before, but never cleared the Senate, and this time it squeaked through 218 to 213, with only one Democrat, Henry Cuellar of Texas, crossing the aisle to support it. So as far as what it actually does on the surface, it requires photo ID to vote. But, the bigger and more consequential piece is that it would bar states from registering people to vote unless they provide documents proving U.S. citizenship. And a driver's license? Almost never enough. For most Americans, we're talking about a passport or a birth certificate. Right? And so here's one of the big problems with that. Only about half of Americans own a passport, and millions don't have easy access to a paper version of their birth certificate. You've got the Brennan Center for Justice estimating that around 21 million Americans, roughly 9% of the country, don't have ready access to either document. And those people we're talking about here, they are disproportionately poor people of color, young adults between 18 and 24, and this one actually surprised me, married women, right? Because millions of them have taken their spouse's name, meaning that their birth certificate no longer matches their legal name. Now, the bill does technically allow for other documents, specifically mentioning real ID, compliant IDs, but then there's also a problem there. Real IDs are available to both citizens and non-citizens, and they don't explicitly indicate citizenship status. So that workaround doesn't actually work. Now, to be fair of supporters of this bill, that the White House isn't wrong that voter ID is very broadly popular. Polls show that most Americans across party lines support requiring photo ID to vote, and 36 states already have voter ID laws. Also, a majority from both parties support requiring proof of citizenship when registering for the first time, and you've had the administration pushing hard on the non-citizen voting angle, with the official White House account posting, American citizens and only American citizens should decide American elections. And yeah, that is a principle I think most people agree with. The issue is that non-citizen voting, it's already illegal. Voters are already required to attest under oath that they're citizens, and lying, it's a federal crime that can lead to fines, prison, and deportation. And studies have consistently shown little to no evidence that fraud is happening at scale. Even Trump's own voter verification initiative has so far found no evidence of widespread fraud. But then with that, you might think, okay, well, if all that's the case, well, why would people support this? Well, with that, you have people like the head of the University of Maryland Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement putting it this way, saying voter ID gets such broad support because large majorities of people have these documents and have them ready, and they don't quite realize that significant portions of the public don't, or that it's hard to get, or that the information's expired. Or to put it in other words, it sounds reasonable until you realize the burden doesn't fall on you. But also, beyond the citizenship documents requirement, there are other provisions in this bill that deserve attention. For mail-in voters, they would have to provide proof of citizenship in person, adding another hoop for people who rely on absentee voting. States would be required to share voter rolls with the Department of Homeland Security and take new steps to remove non-citizens from existing rolls, which experts warn could result in eligible citizens being unknowingly unregistered. And then here's one that should concern people regardless of party. The bill would impose criminal penalties of up to 5 years in prison for any election official who registers an applicant who fails to provide documentary proof of citizenship, even if that applicant is actually a citizen. So you're seeing the head of the Bipartisan Policy Center's Elections Project warning that this risks creating an environment where election officials are almost overly compliant, meaning that officials might reject valid registration simply out of fear of prosecution. And that's before you factor in that verifying the authenticity of citizenship documents is genuinely difficult. Right? Most election offices and DMVs, they do not have the training or the resources to do it reliably. Oh, and also a huge thing is that the law would take effect immediately, which experts say wouldn't give states enough time to implement it before the November midterms, potentially setting up massive legal battles over the results. Now, as far as the bigger picture here, right, realistically, this bill does face an uphill battle in the Senate. Democrats are going to filibuster, and right now there's not enough signs that Republicans are willing to eliminate that option. Even Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska's come out against it, arguing that election issues should be left to the states. Which, by the way, just to throw this out there, that is exactly the argument that Republicans used to kill Democratic voting bills in 2021 and 2022. Mitch McConnell famously said at that time, there's nothing broken around the country. There's no rational basis for federalizing this election. Now, Trump is explicitly calling for the federal government to nationalize elections. So apparently that principle was what? Bullshit? Or maybe it had a shelf life? But also here's the thing. Even if the SAVE Act dies in the Senate, experts say that it really doesn't matter as much as you'd think. Or you've got the head of the Voting Rights Lab telling Axios that the bill sends clear marching orders for state lawmakers to enact Trump's extreme elections agenda, all with an eye toward this year's midterms. And in fact, we've already seen what these laws do at the state level. In Kansas, similar law led to the suspension or cancellation of over 30,000 voter applications, about 12% of all applications that were submitted, before a federal judge struck it down in 2018. In Arizona, a comparable law was litigated all the way to the Supreme Court, which left new requirements in place only for state and local elections, potentially blocking tens of thousands of eligible citizens. And in New Hampshire, a 2024 law reportedly turned away more than 200 potentially eligible voters on election day in 2025. So then just imagine these policies spreading across across multiple states in a federal election year. Of course, this whole situation, it's not in its own bubble. It's not happening in isolation. Just a few weeks ago, the FBI raided an election office here in Fulton County, Georgia, and we're now learning more about how they tried to justify that raid. Right, the unsealed FBI affidavit used to get the search warrant, it was largely based on thoroughly debunked claims about 2020 election fraud. That affidavit also came from Kurt Olson, a guy who played a central role in Trump's effort to overturn the 2020 election, and he was also reportedly described by people inside the first Trump administration as a fringe menace. But now, he is Trump's director of election security and integrity with access to sensitive intelligence agency information to search for evidence of cheating. You had one source telling Politico he will find some super classified report, say it's evidence of fraud, but really it's just completely out of context. And with that, you had the head of Fair Fight Action connecting the dots directly, saying repurposing these conspiracy theories as federal justification is part of a broader campaign to relitigate the past and lay the groundwork for interference in the 2026 election. So you've got the SAFE Act as one prong, FBI election office raids as another, an election denier with intelligence access as a third, and a president who's already preloaded the narrative that any election that he loses is rigged. So when you take all those things together and you're looking at a world where maybe 21 million eligible voters just can't participate, right? Or if it's infinitely harder for them to participate, if election officials are criminally liable for doing their jobs, if federal agencies are raiding election offices based on debunked conspiracy theories, that's not election security. That is a system being engineered to produce specific outcomes. And one of the really frustrating things is that there are real, legitimate conversations to be had about election integrity. Most people, left and right, they want secure and fair elections. But these conversations are getting poisoned when one side is pushing measures that disproportionately target specific groups of eligible voters while providing no meaningful protection against a problem that evidence suggests barely exists. And so I know it's a ways, but some things you can do: check your voter registration status right now at vote.org. Do not assume you are registered. There is trickery afoot. Also, if you live in a state considering proof of citizenship requirements, contact your state legislatures and make your voice heard about the concerns that you have. Also, you can support organizations working on voting access like the Brennan Center, the Bipartisan Policy Center, and your local League of Women Voters chapters. Really, regardless of where you fall politically, pay attention to this. The midterms are coming, the stakes are higher than ever, and the rules of the game are actively being rewritten.